Hello there everyone, I'm Christina of CSLdesigns and today I'm going to show you how to make this double row wire macrame necklace. And this is what mine looks like. You can see here we have a wire macrame right in the middle with beads as well, adding a bit of interest and contrast. And we get a natural curve that's going to fall nice in the neckline because of the different size beads that we're using. You can see here. And then I've just attached my chain going all the way to my clasp and extender chain as well. So if you want to learn how to make this necklace here, then keep watching. So these are then the materials that we're going to be using. First of all, what I have here is my wire. This is a 0.6mm copper wire that I'm going to be using for the whole piece. And then we need our beads. Now what I'm using here is two different sizes of regular rounds. The first ones are some 8mm rounds. These are the larger ones. And then we also need some small ones here, and they are 6mm rounds. Now we need the two different sizes in order to get that curved effect on the neckline. And the specific beads that I'm using are these silver coated hematite gemstone rounds, but obviously you can choose whichever ones you want to. And then you're also going to need some chain and a clasp of your choice. So let's get all the materials ready and let's get started. And then we'll need some lengths of our wire. So what I have here first of all is two lengths of about 35 centimeters each, and these are both going to be the holding wires throughout the piece. And then we also need three lengths of about 1 meter each, and these are going to be the working wires. So then what I've done is I've taken all my lengths of wire here and attached them onto my macrame board. So at the top here I've just put them all into the same slot, and then towards the bottom I have the two short lengths and one of the long ones to begin with here, also in a slot on the bottom of the disc. And then I have two of the long ones, one on each side, kind of loose, that we're going to start out using to make knots with. And we then need to use the two here to make knots around these three holding wires. Now to begin with, we have the three holding wires, so that's the two original short ones, and then I just used one of them long ones as well as the holding wire. That's just in the beginning and also in the end. It's going to turn into a working wire. But we're going to start out making some square knots. So I'm going to start with these two loose long wires, and then I'm going to just start from my left side, and I'm going to stay consistent. It doesn't matter whether you start from the left or the right, just make sure you stay consistent throughout. So I'm going to take that left one over all the holding wires in the middle, so like that. Then I'm going to take the right one, and then I go right to the end, and then I bring that over the other one, and then go underneath everything in the middle, and then up through the loop here on the other side, and pull it all the way through, nice and gently, because it's wire that we're working with. So obviously it's quite a bit different than working with cord. And then pull at the two lengths from either side there, so we then tighten up the knot, and this is then 1/2 of our first square knot. Then I'm going to take the right length and bring over the holding wires, so like that, and then we take the left one and go over that one, go right to the end there, and then underneath everything in the middle, make sure you catch all the holding wires underneath them there, and then up through the loop on the other side, and just pull that length through. So it's the exact same thing as the first side we did, just mirrored, because obviously we're starting from the opposite side. And then again we just bring it through and then end up pulling at both of the ends away from each other, and then that tightens up the other half of the knot, and we then have a full square knot. So I'm just going to make a few of these until I just have a short length there before we start adding in any beads. So I then made 3 square knots, and then we have the working wires just going straight out to the side from that last knot. And then what I've done as well is the rest of my wires down here have kind of separated out. So first of all, I've picked out the long one out of those 3 holding wires, because then now we need to start using that as a working wire as well. So I've just picked that out and separate it from the other ones. Then I have the 2 short ones, and what I've done with them is I've also kind of just split them apart a little bit. So I've just moved them a couple of slots away from each other, just to have a bit of space in between them. And then what we need to do is start making square knots in the middle here, but also adding beads in. So that's what we're also going to start using that 3rd long wire. So I'm actually just going to separate the 2 holding wires out just a little bit more. It's really just to get space to work with in between them. Just something a bit like that, I think, for now. Can always keep moving them around if we need to. Then what I'm going to do is take 2 of the long lengths. So it doesn't really matter what side you start on, but I'm just going to start towards my left to make knots. So that means I'm going to take the long working wire that's furthest towards the left, and then I'm going to take the one that I picked out from the middle. So that was the holding wire before, but now it's turned into a working wire. And then what we're going to do is just make some more square knots, but only now around one of the holding wires. So that's also why we separated them out. So we just make the square knot in the exact same way. So I'll bring my left one over, and then I take the right one, so that is the one that's coming from the middle there really. Goes over that, and then we need to go underneath everything in the middle. So basically what we need to do is avoid the other holding wire here. So just make sure you kind of ignore that as if it's not there. So you want to go down between the two really, and only go underneath the holding wire that we're focusing on and making knots around. And then again up through the loop on the other side, and just pull it all the way through. So just like this here. And then we just tighten this knot in the exact same way, as far up as it'll go, until you obviously can't pull it any further. And then we'll make the other half of the square knot by starting with the wire from the other side now. Bringing that over, then get the end of the other one to go over that one underneath in the middle. Make sure you come now up between the two holding wires there to avoid that other one, and then just bring it through the loop on the other side and pull it all the way through. Make sure you always go through either from the top or the bottom, that initial loop that we make on the first side, and then tighten that, because that's what creates the knot. And you can see then we now have another knot starting here, but basically a bit of a row off from that first one. So you want to make a few more knots here that's going to fit with the first bead that we're going to add in. So I've now ended up here making 3 square knots, because what we need to make sure to do is make the right amount to fit a bead. So that also means I'm going to add my first bead here before I do anything else. So on the right side here, this is going to be kind of my bottom side, or the outer side you could say. I'm going to be adding one of my large beads and push it all the way up to sit next to this row of knots that we've just made. And just push it up, and if you need to kind of just adjust it into place, then just take a bit of time and do that, because it is wire, so we can do that. So just push it all the way up so it sits next to there, because then what we need to do is start making knots on the other side here. So kind of swap over to the other holding wire and then make knots below that bead there, so we also can cage it in. So to make the knots on this side, what I'm going to do is use the same working wire from the other side, so the one that's kind of here in the middle. Naturally wanting to come over towards this side, I'm going to be using that, and then also use the other working wire that we haven't kind of used in this beginning of the middle section yet. And then otherwise we just do the exact same thing. So we bring one wire over that holding wire, and now we only focus on this holding wire here, the one where the bead is on, because we swapped over to that side now. And then otherwise we just make a square knot. Again, make sure to come up between the two holding wires, because we're just focusing on this one, and then pull it through so we can pull it tight here. And then, because it is wire that we're working with, it's quite different than cord, like I said, we just need to make sure we don't get any kinks and bends in a way that we don't want to. So wherever you need to kind of move and maneuver the wire, just do that. Then you can see there, I'm pulling it tight, and then that just fits just perfectly around the bead. And then make the other half. So bring now the right one over to get that little loop formed. And then I bring the left one over that there, and then go down between the two holding wires to then come underneath and up through the loop on that side of the first one that we just made. And pull it all the way through. So just like this. And as we're pulling it up here, what I like to do is just pull the first half tight again and just kind of push against the wires around the bead there, just to get it as tight around the bead as possible. And otherwise, pull your wires tight. And also what I just want to mention is how I like to work with my wire when I do macrame, because if I just pull like this and let go, you're going to be able to see here the wire is gotten quite misshapen. So what I like to do whenever I make a knot, or even the first half of the knot, I always smooth the wire through my hands and fingers like that, and then you can see it smooths it out, and then it's immediately ready for the next part that we're going to do, so the next half of the knot or the next knot. So I always do that, and also it warms up the wire so it makes it more malleable to work with. But then we just need to make some more knots on this side before we can then add the bead on the opposite side in the same way that we just did, but obviously just mirrored. So again, I've made 3 knots here underneath this bead. So I'm going to be making 3 knots from side to side. Then what I've also done now is I've released my holding wires. So they're just free on the bottom, just because what we're going to end up doing now is getting a curve in this. So obviously if I'm using the slots on the top and the bottom, that's just going to stay a straight piece. I need to have the kind of freedom so I can make sure the curve comes naturally into the piece, and also if we need to help it along. And then what I've also done now, because we've got these knots done on this side, I'm going to push up the bead on the opposite holding wire, so the bead comes up and sits right next to the knots that we've just done. And this is then one of the small ones. And then you can see the principle in this is we're now ready to move back over to that side, just like we did here, but again just mirrored, and make knots on this side here to cage in that bead. And we just start doing that in the exact same way. So again, this middle one that's coming naturally towards that side is one of the wires that we're going to be using. Remembering obviously the 2 that are the holding wires, we won't use them to make knots. It's literally just to hold the beads and be inside the knots. Then I take the one that's furthest to the left, bring that over first, and then obviously this one in the middle needs to cross back over to the opposite side. So we have the 2 wires again to make the knots. And then just around this left holding wire, and just bring it around and underneath gently. And obviously now, because the holding wires are loose, it can be a little bit more fiddly to work with, but you can quickly get the hang of it, and also the more work we get done, the easier it's going to be. So like that, pull it nice and tight. And you want to make sure, especially on this side here, to pull it tight, because it's by using those different size beads that will make sure we get the curve in. So make sure that the knots on top and then what you're doing on the bottom here are as close to the bead as possible. If you need to do anything, help it along, squish it together closer, or once you've made your knots. So I'm just going to make the other half here. So bring one side over and then bring the other one over that to go underneath and up through. Remember, still come up between the 2 holding wires, and then bring them closer here. And before I completely pull the second half tight, I'm just going to pull the first half tight just like before. Again, to help make it as tight as possible against the bead. And then just pull the 2 tails. And you can see, if it's nice and tight, you can't really see gaps between the knots and the bead there above and below, then it's fine. Otherwise, what you can always do to help it along is grab hold of your holding wire and then just push up on the knots a little bit to help kind of squeeze it close around the bead, because that means that it's this small bead here on the one side that's going to make a curve in this direction, and obviously the larger bead is kind of on the outside there. And this is just how I'm working with it. But then you want to keep making the same amount of knots between them, and then once you made 3 here, you add your next bead next to those knots onto the opposite holding wire there. And again, this is then a large one, so we're constantly going to make sure we have the large ones on the one side, on the same side throughout, and then the small ones on the same side throughout as well on the opposite side there. So like I said, it doesn't really matter whether you make them opposite than what I have, just make sure you add the same size on the same side throughout, and then obviously it'll curve accordingly. So I now kept on going here, and you can see we get this nice natural curve on the piece because of the different size beads that we use. And what I've ended up using is 9 of the larger beads and then 8 of the smaller beads. So I make sure I start on a large one and I finish on a large one as well. You can just see here I've got the last one open. I've not kind of caged that in yet because we're going to do that by finishing it off as well. And as you're making this throughout, you can just kind of keep moving it around, because obviously, like I said, it's not going to be a straight piece, so you just to make it easy to work with, just move it around however you need to. But then otherwise, we need to then just finish off this end basically just the same way as we started out, but just in reverse. So to do that, we have the 2 holding wires coming straight down, so they're going to stay like that. And then I'm going to take the middle one here out of the working wires as well and bring that in with them, because that's how we had them in the beginning. We had the 3 holding wires. So just literally bring that down with the other 2, and then I'm just going to bring them all a little bit closer together. So the one coming from the bead, for instance, just push that closer to the other ones. So obviously with it being wire as well, we can just shape it how we want to, just so they end up lying pretty close together here, but still coming straight down away from the end of the piece, or something a bit like that. And then I'm going to use the remaining 2 wires here, working wires, to make knots around these 3, just like we did in the beginning. So you just want to continue making your square knots, and also could actually just bring these holding wires now back into my board just to help make it a little bit easier to work with. So like that. And then just make another square knot here. So this wire from the outside is just going to come around the bead. And then we're going to make a square knot below that there, but now around all three holding wires. Again, just make sure you tighten it as nice as possible. And if you look on the other end, that's going to be exactly how the wires are on the other end as well. But obviously we're just kind of finishing it off here instead of starting it out. So the other half of the square knot, bring it through, and just like all the other times, I just like to tighten the first half again and then push against the wires going around the bead and the knots there, and then I tighten the other half and pull it nice and tight. So it's more or less pretty seamless there, the transition between that row of knots and then the new ones that we're making here around all of the holding wires. And otherwise you just want to make the same amount of knots on here as we did in the beginning. So when I then finished off that end with the knots there, then this is the main part of the necklace. So all this I have to do really is finish off both of the ends. So I'm just going to show you on one end here how to finish off the wires, because obviously what we'll end up doing is making a wrapped loop so we can attach chain or whatever we want to that. But then obviously we have to get rid of the rest of them here. So we have the two wires that are coming out from the knot there, making the knot. Then we have the three that are the holding wires. So first of all, I want to start with the ones that are coming out from that last knot, so the working wires there. And you're going to find that they're kind of coming out at different directions. You're going to have one coming more towards one side of the knot and one more towards the other side. So what I'm going to do is kind of keep them in that direction. So that means this one here is coming out towards the top of how I'm holding it. So I'm going to bring that over the top of the knot. So just over to the opposite side basically. And then I'm just going to flip it around. This one is coming out towards the back. And I'm just going to also bring that over to the opposite side. And the basic crossing now around these holding wires inside of that knot, the last one there. Then I'm going to cut off the excess, but leave a short little tail, a couple of millimeters after where they wrap. Like that, and just cut off the other one as well. And then I'm going to grab my chain nose pliers and then find that little short end there of the wire, grab onto it with my pliers, just right at the end, and then I want to just give it a little bit of a flick with my wrist in towards the knot, so it ends up bending basically in towards the knot there. You can see that, and I'm just going to do the same on the other side. Just grab the very end of that wire and then flick it in towards the knot, and then all you got to do is squeeze on top of the knot with your pliers to make sure that they, instead of kind of sticking out a bit, they're going to end really nestle in to the knot. And it's just making that little flick on the end of the wire, so bending it inwards is going to make sure the end is going to be inside of the knot instead of sticking out and maybe catching or scratching on your clothes. And then just make sure you run your finger over. If you can't feel anything kind of scratchy, then it's fine. And then we just have these three left that we then need to finish off as well. And then as for the holding wires here, we need to get rid of two of them. So you can see here we have them lying flat next to each other. I want to keep the middle one and get rid of the two outer ones. So what I'm going to do is just separate them out here. Then I need to wrap them around that middle one to secure them as well. So I'm just going to bring one over the top to the other side. Then the other one I'm going to straight away bring around the back of that middle wire to the opposite side. I'm just going to make sure to kind of push them down as far as possible right after that knot. And then what I'm going to do is basically have these wires chase each other for a bit. So I'm going to kind of keep wrapping them around just one at a time, making sure the wraps are nice and tight. So basically we're just kind of wrapping these around but simultaneously. And just do it a few times until you feel like they'll be nice and secure to cut off the excess of. You can see there we have them wrapped, and we can always use pliers as well to help push them down, because I still want to make sure the wraps are so close to each other as possible really. So something like that is fine. Basically more or less 3 times I've wrapped them around. And then just make sure to push them down. And then I want to cut off the excess. So I'm just going to grab a pair of flush cutters here. And all you want to do is, again, make sure they kind of finish on opposite sides. I'm just going to cut one at a time right by the last wrap, as close as in as you can get. Cut off the excess. And the same with the other one. Just cut off the excess of that as well. And then all we got to do is, because we've cut off ends of wire, we just got to make sure use your chain nose pliers or flat nose and squeeze in those ends so they're not slightly sticking out or anything, because if you put your finger over them you'll be able to feel them just slightly. So just make sure we kind of get rid of that. Make sure we do that with both of them as well. So now basically we just have this one wire left which we can now use to make our wrap loop with. So again, I'm just going to grab my chain nose pliers here, because what we need to do first of all is get a bend into it. So I'm going to kind of hold it to the side and then put my pliers just a few millimeters above where those wraps are, so I have a bit of bare wire, you could see, before I make my bend. Something like that. So that's from the front there. Then I'm going to grab, in my case here, I'm using some bail making pliers, my 6-step bail making pliers, just so I know I can get the same size loop on both sides there, so it becomes exactly the same size, because I'm using that same step. But you can also use round nose pliers, it doesn't really matter, whatever you have handy. Then I place them on that bend, and then I bring the tail back all the way around, so we get a complete full circle. Take them out, and then it looks like that. Then I grab onto that circle with my pliers to make sure that the circle keeps its shape. And then we basically just want to fill in this gap that we have between or underneath the circle and the previous wrap that we did. So we just wrap it around to secure it until we haven't got any more space. So I'm looking at the back here, and I can see that I don't have any more space to wrap, so I'm just going to go in and cut off the excess in the same way as before. Cut off the excess like that, and then make sure again to press down that end, because otherwise it'll just be slightly sticking out. So there we go. So now we have that wrap loop on the end where we can then attach whatever kind of chain that we want to. And obviously you want to do this exact same thing on the other end as well. So I've now attached my chain here and my findings, so you can see going all the way up the side, and then I've got my lost claw clasp and extended chain as well. And then this is the finished necklace. So we have a wire macrame right in the middle here with the beads, and then giving this nice curve so it's going to fall nicely in the neckline. So that's how you make this necklace. So I really hope you enjoyed this. Now if you do enjoy wire macrame in general, I do have loads of other tutorials on my channel for it, so feel free to check that out, and I also have a playlist that I'm going to link to. But otherwise I really hope you enjoyed this one, and thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.